Beneath the heavy cloak of winter's first dawn, the world held its breath in frozen silence. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the gray sky, each one a fragile whisper of cold that settled softly upon the worn rooftops and skeletal trees of the little town. At the edge of this quiet world stood a chain-link fence, its metal links frost-bitten and dull, enclosing a small kennel whose shadows stretched long and restless in the muted morning light. Inside, a figure moved, a wild silhouette with fur as black as midnight, eyes blazing with the fierce light of a soul untamed. They called him Shadow, the wild police dog who no one could claim, no one could calm. His breath came out in ragged puffs, white and fleeting against the bitter air, his paws scraping the earth with restless desperation. He was a creature of contradiction, a prisoner and a spirit, feared by those who glimpsed him and mourned by those who glimpsed only what was lost. Beyond the fence, a quiet figure watched. She was a child wrapped in layers of wool and loneliness, her breath swirling in the cold as she clutched a frayed scarf to her chest. Eira, her name, was soft and old, like a whispered secret carried on the wind. She stood alone, her gaze locked on the wildness within the cage, her heart stirring with a longing she did not fully understand. To the town, Eira was an enigma, a fragile girl touched by the harshness of winter, and harder still, by the chill of whispered judgments. The people muttered behind cupped hands, their words drifting like frost through the narrow streets. Nobody could tame him, they said of Shadow. And of Eira, they said less, but felt just as cold. The sheriff, Gideon, a man whose eyes were sharp as winter ice, watched the dog with a mixture of disdain and resignation. His orders were clear, and final. Shadow was to remain chained, a threat contained but never conquered. "He's dangerous," Gideon said, his voice rough as gravel beneath the weight of years. To him, Shadow was not a creature to be understood, but a beast to be controlled. Yet even his stern gaze faltered when it met the quiet courage in Eira's eyes, a flicker of something stubborn and unspoken that he could neither command nor deny. In the heart of that frozen morning, the town was wrapped not only in snow, but in stories told with sharp glances and softer sighs. Mara, the keeper of whispered tales, carried gossip like a warm shawl against the biting cold. She spoke of Shadow as if he were a storm on the horizon, a danger too wild to approach, a fate best left unchallenged. And of Eira, she murmured warnings, her voice thin and brittle. That girl will never tame that beast. The judgment was heavy, like the weight of ice on bare branches. But Eira listened not with anger, but with a quiet resilience born of having been cast aside before. Behind closed doors, Rowan, Eira's father, wore his shame like a second skin. His eyes, tired and distant, avoided his daughter's gaze, as if her presence reminded him of battles lost long ago. He carried the burden of the town's silent condemnation, and in the coldness of winter, their home was a place where warmth was scarce, and words even scarcer. Yet even in that silence, there lingered a fragile thread, a hope that perhaps the wildness in Shadow and the gentleness in Eira might weave something new, something stronger than the bitter cold inside the kennel. Shadow's world was one of restraint and yearning. His snarls were thunderous echoes of a spirit bristling against the cage that held him. But beneath the fury, there was a tremble, a fragile ember of trust waiting to be kindled. Eira's visits became a quiet ritual in the frozen days that followed, each one a step toward the impossible. She came with hands trembling in the cold, offering scraps of warmth and soft words spoken like lullabies carried on winter winds. Her voice was gentle, a balm to the jagged edges of Shadow's pain, a thread reaching out across the chasm of fear and rejection. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached, her scarf trailing behind her like a banner of hope. She moved slowly, carefully, as if each breath might shatter the fragile trust she sought to build. And then, in a moment suspended in time, Shadow lowered his great head, hesitant, but drawn by a force he could not name. Eira extended a hand, trembling yet steady, her fingers brushing against the coarse fur, a bridge formed between two lonely worlds. The warmth of that touch melted a little of the frost that had hardened Shadow's heart. And for a breathless instant, silence spoke louder than words. Days bled into one another. each visit a quiet dance of patience and hope. The ritual grew a shared solitude in the shadow of judgment,
Oh.
a language of small gestures that spoke of something deeper than fear or ownership. Town gossip swirled ever darker, Mara's words sharpening into warnings that clung like icicles to the edges of Eira's resolve. "You cannot change what is wild," they said. But Eira, with eyes like winter stars, did not hear the harsh voices. Instead, she listened to the steady beat of a broken heart, learning to trust. The moment came like the soft light before dawn, when Shadow's tongue brushed Eira's hand, tentative and unsure. It was a fragile offering, a fragile promise woven in the quiet cold. In that small, trembling touch, a bond was sealed not with grand declarations, but with the silent poetry of survival and connection. The world outside the kennel remained harsh, the whispers of judgment still swirling like relentless snowstorms. But inside that small space, time slowed, the frozen edges softened, and two souls found a fragile grace. Eira's loneliness began to shift. No longer a void, but a canvas painted with the brush strokes of trust. The scarf around her neck fluttered in the breeze, carrying the scent of pine and hope, mingling with the faint warmth of Shadow's breath. The day waned, shadows lengthened, and the winter light faded to a pale glow. But in that quiet moment, the wildness within the dog met the gentleness within the girl. And neither was alone anymore. The town continued to watch, its heart wrapped in suspicion and fear. But a subtle change was unfolding, one unseen by those who whispered in the dark, but palpable in the fragile warmth between a girl and a wild dog. The stories would grow, the judgment would linger, but for now, in this small, frozen corner of the world, a quiet revolution was taking root, one slow step, one tender touch, one breath of grace at a time. And as the last light slipped beneath the horizon, Eira turned away from the kennel, a soft smile touching her lips, carrying with her the promise of something yet to come, an unbelievable story waiting to be told. Winter deepened its hold on the town, blanketing the world in white silence, as if the earth itself held its breath, waiting. The brittle wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying with it a chill that seeped into bones and hearts alike. Yet within this frozen stillness, a fragile warmth began to grow, a quiet, slow-burning ember in the shared space between a wild dog and a little girl named Eira. Shadow's coat, once ragged and matted with neglect, now bore the soft imprint of Kara's threadbare scarf, wrapped gently around his neck, a quiet testament to the bond that had formed in stolen moments. He was still the fierce spirit the town feared, but beneath the sharp edges, something gentler stirred, a loyalty carved not from chains or commands, but from trust. Eira's visits became less a secret and more a ritual, her presence a soft pulse in the dog's restless heart. Her hands, once tentative, now moved with deliberate tenderness, smoothing fur and murmuring quiet songs that carried warmth even on the coldest nights. The town, however, remained unyielding. Gossip slithered like smoke through the icy streets, and Mara's voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut deeper with each whispered warning. "That beast will bring nothing but trouble," she hissed to those who would listen, her eyes narrowed with a judgment that felt as old and biting as the winter wind itself. Yet Eira bore the weight of their suspicion with a quiet dignity, her spirit neither broken nor bowed. She understood the loneliness that came from standing apart, the ache of being seen but not understood. Her defiance was not loud but persistent, a steady flame flickering against the gathering frost. Inside her small home, Rowan watched from the shadows, his heart a tangled knot of regret and reluctant hope. He saw in Eira's unwavering devotion to the dog a mirror of her own resilience, a reflection of the courage he had long feared had fled from their family. Though words were scarce, the distance between father and daughter began to shrink, bridged by the silent acknowledgement of battles, fought and wounds still healing. Rowan's guarded gaze softened each time he caught Eira speaking gently to Shadow, a balm for two souls scarred but not defeated. One evening, as twilight bled into night, the tension that had quietly coiled within the town reached its breaking point. The sheriff, Gideon, stood at the edge of the kennel, his breath clouding in the frosty air as his eyes flickered with conflicted resolve.
Oh.
The town's unrest had grown too loud to ignore. Rumors of shadows, dangerous nature swelled, voices calling for his removal, for the beast to be caged no longer but silenced forever. Mara's whispers became accusations, each one sharpened by fear and misunderstanding. He's a threat. No child should be near him. Eira faced the storm of judgment with only her steady gaze and the warmth of her small hand pressed against Shadow's rough fur. She said nothing, for words would have faltered beneath the weight of their scorn. Instead, she stood as a quiet shield, a fragile yet unyielding testament to the power of trust forged in the coldest of winters. That night, as snow fell heavy and thick, the unthinkable happened. A fire broke out in a neighboring home ablaze, born of neglect and fury, roaring to life beneath the brittle beams and dry timbers. The town awoke to the crackling fury, alarm ringing through frosted streets like a desperate call. In the chaos, the flame's hungry tongue crept dangerously close to the kennel where Shadow was held. The metal chain that bound him strained and snapped, loosened by the heat and the dog's fierce will to protect. Shadow burst free, a dark tempest against the glowing inferno. His wildness, once feared and shunned, became the town's salvation. With fierce determination and unyielding courage, he raced through smoke and shadow, barking warnings, guiding trapped neighbors away from danger with the precision of a guardian long misunderstood. Eira's voice, soft yet commanding, cut through. The roar a whispered tether that called him back from the edge of chaos. The town stood breathless, watching as the beast they had condemned moved with the grace of a protector, a silent promise etched in every fierce glance and careful step. Sheriff Gideon's hard facade cracked, his eyes reflecting a grudging awe that had no place in words. Mara's whispers died into stunned silence, the harsh judgments melted away beneath the heat of truth. When the flames finally bowed to the dawn, the air hung heavy with smoke and a new kind of hope, no longer wild in the eyes of those who watched, trotted beside Eira, his fierce loyalty now a quiet pride that warmed the frozen earth beneath their feet. The scarf around his neck, once a simple, threadbare gesture, became a symbol of transformation, not only of a dog once feared, but of a town learning to see beyond the surface of things. In the days that followed, the cold that had gripped the town began to thaw not only in the earth, but in the hearts of those had watched the silent dance of trust between a girl and a dog. Social walls, once rigid and cold as ice, softened with every small act of kindness that trickled through the streets. Rowan's footsteps grew closer to Eira's side, his silence now a space for unspoken forgiveness and the rebuilding of what had been broken. The snow still fell, delicate and relentless, but beneath the quiet weight of winter, something new had taken root, a slow and steady transformation born from the smallest of gestures, the gentlest of touches. In the hush of an evening lit by flickering firelight, Eira and Shadow rested side by side, the warmth of their bond a refuge from the cold. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretched with the richness of unspoken understanding. And in that space, they were no longer the girl and the wild dog the town had known. They were a story rewritten by grace. And now, as you listen to this whispered tale, let it be a quiet reminder. Sometimes, it is not the roar of grand declarations that changes the world, but the softest, most patient acts of trust. In the coldest winters of our lives, warmth can grow in silence, and the wildest spirits can be tamed not by force, but by love. If this story has touched the corners of your heart, stay with me, subscribe and walk with me through more whispered tales where every silence holds a secret and every shadow a light waiting to be found.